The Incredibles 2 is directed by Brad Bird and is the first fully animated film I've seen in cinemas in over 5 years, which is kind of ridiculous. And obviously this film is the sequel to a film that is very important to me and I think important to a lot of people. The first Incredibles is my all-time favorite Pixar film. It's my second favorite animated film of all time. Lion King is my favorite, which is partly why this film is one of my most anticipated of this year and why I was so excited to see it, but also because Brad Bird is coming back. And of course, if you've seen any of Brad Bird's films, then you know that this is someone who makes films that are just filled with this sense of fun and playfulness and adventure, but also has that very cinematic feel, is very stylish, is very cool. And so going into this film, I was confident that Brad Bird would deliver, right? And deliver he did, because oh my god, I love The Incredibles 2. Nostalgia aside, this is definitely one of my favorite films of the year, and I think that they nailed almost everything. I think that one of the very, very obvious and clear improvements from the first film is the animation, because the film is gorgeous. Incredibles 2 is one of the best looking films of the year, and the overall visual style I thought was flawless. I love that they balanced certain camera moves and angles that, you know, real cameramen can't achieve with the more realistic stuff. Like, you had depth of field in it, and you had slightly sort of handheld camera moments, which I thought really made the film feel grounded and realistic, while still being cinematic and being really, really epic. And I thought that just the overall visual style, there's just so many gorgeous shots. And actually, two of my favorite films from a visual standpoint this year are Isle of Dogs and The Incredibles 2, both animated films, and I think that they really have nailed the animation, and it pretty much is flawless. Another thing that I thought was basically perfection was Michael Giacchino's score. The music for this film is just unparalleled. Obviously, Michael Giacchino did the first Incredibles film, and he's been doing a ton of blockbuster films lately, and this is one of my favorite scores from him. There's this one scene involving helicopters in which the music comes in and just seriously elevates that scene. So good. The voice acting was amazing. Obviously, we had most of the original cast back, with the exception of, I think, the kid who plays Dash, because obviously he's grown up now, so I think they had to get someone else. But then we have the new members of the cast, such as Bob Odenkirk and Catherine Keener, both of which were really, really good. So now let's talk about the story and the characters, which of course is very important to the film. And Brad Bird has actually said that there was no way he was going to do an Incredibles sequel unless the story and the characters are just as good as, if not better than, the first. And here, I would say that he was right. It's very much like the first film in that there are many twists and turns that you don't see coming, but at the same time, I feel that because we are kind of living in the golden age of superhero films, and we've seen so many at this point, there are moments that I think we can predict. But if this film had come out 10 years ago, it would have been seen as like a great plot twist or something. But overall, I would say that the story of this film is very, very good, and it does such a great job of furthering the characters and their relationships. And I think that this is definitely one of the things that this film absolutely nails: the relationship between each member of the family. Now, obviously, with the first film, you had Mr. Incredible out there doing all the missions and stuff, and then Mrs. Incredible back home, taking after the family. But now it's kind of switched around, because Elastigirl is very much, I wouldn't say the main character of the film, but she gets the most amount of action and stuff, whereas Mr. Incredible is at home taking care of the kids. And it was so interesting to see that change. And it was great to see Mr. Incredible interact with the children, and also see Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl's ideals conflicting, because they obviously have very different views on the world, on the law, and stuff like that. And I thought that that was definitely one of the most interesting parts of the film, and one of the most integral parts of the film. And obviously, the great story, the great characters are elevated by some amazing action scenes. This film has some of the best action scenes so far this year. Like I said, there's this great sequence involving helicopters, there's a great train chase, and one of the things I love so much was that Brad Bird was actually able to use these characters' powers inventively, creatively, let them play off each other. And it's so great to see someone have that level of knowledge and expertise, not only in terms of storytelling, but also in terms of action filmmaking. And I honestly think that that's one of the things that makes Brad Bird like one of the greats. Unfortunately, this film does have one or two flaws. The first one being that the main villain for this film is nowhere near as good as Syndrome. Now, that is probably an obvious thing to say, because Syndrome is one of the greats, but especially when compared to some of the villains we've had this year, like Killmonger and Thanos. I'm about to see Ant-Man and the Wasp today, so how that villain is good or bad, we'll see. But this villain for the screenslaver for The Incredibles 2, I thought was slightly weak. It wasn't necessarily a bad villain, but wasn't necessarily a good one either. And my second problem would be that at times the film does feel a little bit unfocused and a little bit confused, because this being a sequel, there are a lot more subplots and things that are happening. You know, you have Mrs. Incredible doing her thing, Mr. Incredible at home taking care of the kids, you have this whole subplot with Violet, you have this whole subplot with Jack, and so at times it does feel the film struggles a little bit, just a little bit, to maintain a sense of focus and keep everything together. Because with the first film, it was very simple. You had the family here, they kind of go off on their own stories and then they come back together at the end, but then here you have like all these different storylines, and so it does feel a little bit distracted at some points. But overall, I would say that the film does a good job of keeping that fast pace, maintaining that level of momentum. Even in the smaller scenes, you can still see the passion and the energy, but I would say again that at some points it does feel slightly distracted. Now, my final issue with the film is very much a personal issue, and one that most people probably won't have, but obviously this being a film that is aimed primarily at children, obviously one of the things that makes Brad Bird such a great filmmaker is that all of his films can be enjoyed by everyone, but this being a Pixar film, Disney film, it is primarily aimed at children, and so they kind of have to keep fast paced and not make the runtime too lengthy. I think this film is about 2 hours and 5 minutes, but as someone who has been waiting for this film for 14 years, or someone who, this film is very important to me, I did wish to see a little bit more. I wanted a little bit more of it. We did get to see a lot of the characters. Obviously, Frozone was in it just the right amount, Edna was in it just the right amount, but I was hoping to see a little bit more of everyone and everything. But aside from that, this is very much, without a doubt, one of my favorites of the year. I'm going to give The Incredibles 2 an A-. As for where this film goes in my sort of Pixar ranking, it's definitely top half, 100%, maybe even top quarter. I put it just above Inside Out and just below Coco. I think that's a pretty solid ranking. This is definitely a film that I'm going to be rewatching and I'm very excited to see again. But that was my review for The Incredibles 2, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you.